Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's discussion about the latest NAEP results and what they mean for state and district leaders working to improve student outcomes. I'm Anna Edwards, co-founder and chief advocacy officer of Whiteboard Advisors. We're an education, policy research, advocacy, and strategic communications firm. Based in Washington, D.C., we've been pretty busy lately, but for the last 20 years of our work, we've actually been far more focused on the efforts at the state and district level. And now we feel like it's time more than ever to focus in there as we look at the sobering results that NAEP show us and to look at some of the promising bright spots, which is why we're really thrilled to have state leaders like Angelica Infante-Green from Rhode Island, Eric Mackey from Alabama, who are able to hold steady and see those bumps in math that were real bright spots in looking at the data over the last few weeks. To set the stage today, we are thrilled to have Leslie Muldoon from NAEP and Jane Swift, a member of the National Assessment Governing Board, to walk us through the data and what it means. So with that, I'd love to start with turning it over to my colleague, Hillary Knudsen, VP, to tell us what we saw in the data. Hillary, over to you.
Thanks so much, Anna. This conversation does certainly come at an important time, and I'm appreciative to all of you joining today. As a former staffer at the Tennessee Department of Education and on the Senate Help Committee, I've certainly relied on federal data throughout my career, like many of you. This week's news about funding freezes and potential cuts, it underscores really the importance of why independent, rigorous data sources matter, especially NAEP, but certainly not only NAEP. The research that comes from the data of NCES and IES are critical, and these resources give schools, districts, and states the insights that they need to make these informed decisions. And we're excited to hear from our state chiefs about how they use these data as well. So of course, it's not just policymakers and educators that use these data, it's researchers and advocacy groups, our curriculum developers and ed tech companies. Really, anyone working to support student success rely on federal data in one way or another. Without these data, we are working in blind spots and losing the key insights and struggle and unable to see where there are successes and where there are struggles and what's driving those outcomes. Really, we can't afford to guess. So the real question is, how do we take what we've learned from these results and turn it into meaningful action for students? Which of course brings us to NAEP, the centerpiece of today's conversation. Colloquially, we refer to it as the nation's report card. It's of course the most rigorous assessment that we have, the only one that tracks comparable trends over time and over states. The results show where states and districts are making progress, and just as importantly, where those challenges remain, especially amidst so much disruption in education over the last several years. So we know some states have made real gains and others continue to see challenges. We've seen a widening of the difference between those highest performers and lowest performers. And so understanding these shifts is more important now than ever. So I'm very excited to dive in with my fellow experts, Leslie and Jane, to talk about the big picture and really what we see in this year's results. So without further ado, we've read all of the headlines, many of which have featured our panelists, but Governor Swift, from your perspective, and serving on the NAGB board, how do you frame the importance of and relevance of NAEP? What does this assessment tell us? What do these results tell us?
Well, thank you, Hillary, and I'm thrilled to be here today. You did a great job of setting the table and talking about, NAEP's importance. It is the largest nationally representative and continuing assessment of what students know and what they can do. As a former governor, but also as a parent, that's incredibly important when we are faced with a world where the velocity of change, the demands on our workforce are greater than ever, and we want every child to be successful. And certainly, so it's really important that we have this standard, that it can inform policy and practice, and that we can track performance over time. No one likes bad news, but if you ignore bad news, it doesn't get better. And I would just say that I think many folks who are listening today know there was not a ton of good news in the NAEP data, but there was a veritable tsunami of important data for us to look at to inform future practice. So we know, as you said, higher performing students are scoring higher and struggling students continue to lose ground. Those types of achievement gaps in a country where we have a demographic cliff coming, where we have a low birth rate. And so we need every single child and every single worker in our country to be prepared to take on the challenges of the workforce. But also we want them to be able to lead lives of purpose and passion. And without basic skills, it's really hard to pursue your dreams. And so I would say those are the stakes. And you know, it's for all of us who, and I know those of you who are in DC might feel like you're getting a little bit of a replay of COVID because you're trapped either in your house with your kids or in an airport. You know, that it can cause a little PTSD for all of us. But what's really important here is to look at this data and to understand just how deeply COVID impacted children. And people can do the math on their own, but I'll do it quickly for them. You know, for the students who were assessed in this data for 4th grade and 5th grade, they were in kindergarten and 1st grade during the height of COVID. Everybody, even a non-educator like me, is aware those are critical years for reading attainment. And so, you know, the reductions that we saw, the fact that students are still not back to where they were pre-COVID, and actually that's pronounced in reading in 4th grade and 8th grade. We had a little bit of good news in 4th grade math, but 8th graders were in 4th grade during COVID. So those impacts endure. They are the most enduring on our lowest achieving students who perhaps need our public education system the most. So that's sort of the high level of where the results are, some bright spots in math, and we have some of the superstars who are some of the handful of states and districts that actually showed real progress and beat pre-COVID results, and I'm looking forward to hearing from them later.
Thank you, Governor Swift. The tsunami of data, if that hasn't been tweeted yet, I really hope we capture that alongside passion and purpose. So Leslie, I would love to hear more from you, right? On we can share some of the specifics around the data and pull up any of your slides as well. But I think the part here of just that idea, right? The tsunami of data. So what is it that we should be looking at first?
Sure. So, well, thank you, Hillary and Anna and Whiteboard for having us here today and talking about the NAEP results. I think there's, as we've looked at the data, there's sort of 3 key storylines that we're trying to track and trying to dig into more. The first is just looking from 2024 to 2022 and trying to understand where our students are relative to the last administration. But the big picture here is that the nation has not recovered from the pandemic disruptions on children's education. And we see different patterns in mathematics and in reading. So here on the slide, you'll see reading scores are on the left and math is on the right. If you've seen any of the NAEP coverage, I'm sure you've seen a chart like this. But you can see in reading that we have seen declines over at least 3 consecutive administrations of the NAEP reading assessment. So this means, well before COVID reached the United States, American students in 4th and 8th grade were suffering from declining reading comprehension skills. On the right side, you'll see in mathematics a different story over time, and that is one in particular at 4th grade, where our students were showing really significant increases in their math achievement over the decades prior to our current decade. And then when we hit the pandemic, or in the years just prior to the pandemic, a little bit of stabilization followed by some significant declines. And so, if you remember nothing from this year's Nation's report card, I think it's that we have not yet recovered from the pandemic's disruptions. I want to show just briefly this look at 2024 relative to sort of 3 different time points that we want to keep in mind and help folks underscore, or help underscore for folks as they look at the data. So the first map is on the next slide, on slide 4. And here you can see that when we look at 2022 relative to 2024, we do see some improvement And in particular in fourth grade mathematics, as Governor Swift mentioned. We saw 15 states had their fourth grade math scores go up by a statistically significant amount, including Alabama. And but this map shows you a picture of sort of stagnation and some decline, right? The only grade and the subject at which we saw increases was fourth grade math. The yellow states here are states where they had at least one subject in which they saw statistically significant declines, and the rest stayed relatively stable or had no statistically significant changes. If you'll go to the to slide 5, this is this sort of gives you a very quick visual of 2019 relative to 2024. So when you want to think about, you know, quote unquote recovery, the picture is more stark, right? We see almost every state except for Louisiana and Alabama showing statistically significant declines in at least one, but in most cases multiple grades and subjects. And then finally, if you'll go to slide 6 here, this is the longer term picture that I was describing, and that you, Hillary, hit upon in your opening comments, that for the last decade, and this is true of every subject and grade that we assess, we see the nation's lowest performing students showing significant declines, and the nation's higher performing students either staying flat or increasing, depending on the subject and grade. And I will say, you know, this is sort of a new way of thinking about the achievement gap, because this cuts across every demographic group, every racial ethnic group that we include in the assessment. And it's a really pervasive trend that I am glad to see people focusing on as one of the main headlines from the 2024 report card. It's deeply troubling, but critically important to understand.
It's a great point, Leslie, and I think we'd be remiss, right, to not mention how glaring it is, and also that when we want all students, right, we want all students to be able to achieve those outcomes. To Governor Swift's point of finding purpose, right, and jobs that pay well and contribute to society, and we're on this trend not going to make that happen. I think there's one point, Leslie, I want to get in the weeds for a second, because we referenced the achievement levels here. Like, yeah. I've heard some of the discourse around how do we define NAEP proficiency? How is that different from state summative assessment proficiency? And thinking about scale scores versus proficient. Sometimes we see increases in scale scores and proficient and not proficiency, or vice versa. Can you give us a little bit in the weeds on that?
Sure. So the governing board establishes the achievement levels for the NAEP assessment. And this is very in the weeds, but I think we're a victim of our own success here, because, you know, the board pioneered this approach to setting achievement levels anchored in knowledge and skills that students should have and things they should be able to attain and do back in the 1990s. And states followed suit, right? So NAEP sort of set the standard for achievement levels, and then states followed with similar methodologies and similar approaches. But under federal law, we're able to set their achievement levels at the level they deemed appropriate, right? So there is a difference between what NAEP defines as proficient and what states do. There's been a lot of convergence over the years. We've seen through some studies that our colleagues at NCS have done, the state mapping study, for those of you who are NAEP fans.
Which everyone on this call should be. If you're on this call and don't know what Leslie's mentioning, please, we need you to be engaged.
True. The state mapping study has shown, you know, a real raising of the bar over the last decade plus, with states like Rhode Island really setting their achievement levels at a high standard, reflecting the need for students to be able to meet those high expectations, to have the life of passion and purpose that Governor Swift mentioned. So the NAEP achievement levels, if you go to slide 6 and 7, I have some examples that we pulled out just to try to illustrate for folks what this translates to in terms of actual knowledge and skills. So you'll see here on the left, we start with NAEP basic. And so what is it? By the way,
I love this. I think it makes it so real for parents, for non-academics and practitioners. Like, you can put into your head, why does my child need to know this?
Yeah.
So anyway, I didn't mean to interrupt, Leslie, but I was too enthusiastic to stay quiet.
I'm so glad because I think it's really useful. And as the parent of, elementary school students who will soon be taking the state standardized tests, like seeing these examples helps me understand what is it my kids need, what do I want to see on their homework, right? So NAEP Basic is sort of the minimum threshold that we set. And one of the really troubling things about this year's data was the significant number of students who were scoring below the NAEP Basic level, particularly in reading. So I want to talk about that in just a moment. But you'll see here sort of examples of what it looks like to be at NAEP Basic, NAEP Proficient, or NAEP Advanced in both the 4th and the 8th grade. And so you can see the sophistication of student knowledge and skills as you go up the achievement levels. Hillary, you asked about how you might see an increase in scale scores without having a corresponding increase in student scoring at the proficient level. And
Yes.
you might, there's multiple ways that could happen. You could see more
Right.
students at the very low end of the performance distribution. You could see sort of their average score ticking up, and that would not affect the number of students who reach the proficient or advanced level, but it would raise the average score. You could also see that, students on the higher end of the performance distribution, their scores might be going up on average, but you're not raising, the scores for students at the lower end. And therefore, you're relatively stable. You might be moving kids from proficient to advanced, but not from basic to proficient
Right.
or low. So
which ties us back to those widening gaps between those at the top and the bottom. We did get one question in the chat about those percentile gaps, and if on math in particular, is the 4th grade math and 8th grade math gaps growing similarly? Are we
yes,
seeing the same trend in that widening gap?
we are now. During the pandemic from 22 to 20, from 2019 to 2022, we were seeing declines in 8th grade mathematics that were relatively equivalent across the performance distribution. But now we are seeing higher performing students rebounding more and lower performing students either declining or sort of staying relatively stable. So the pandemic in math, those percentile patterns were a little bit different than we saw prior to and since.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm glad that we got to at least put some math problems up. As most folks know, I spend a lot of my time thinking about math and math policy, and it is one of the few bright spots that we can point to, and including for, we're going to talk about states, but I think also talking about the TUTA districts and the districts that have been beating the odds, and especially those that serve primarily economically disadvantaged students and students of color, that you are seeing gains as well. Before we turn it over to our state panelists, are there any other bright spots you would like to call out, or anything else in particular that we didn't cover in the weeds part that you want to make sure folks hear?
I think, well, we've talked about Alabama. Louisiana also made headlines justifiably for being the only state that has surpassed its pre-pandemic scores in 4th grade reading. So really deserve a lot of credit for that. There's also several TUTA districts, as you mentioned, Hillary, large urban districts that volunteer to participate in NAEP that made significant gains in 4th grade math. My own district of DC Public Schools leading the pack with a 10-point increase from 22 to 24 in 4th grade math, followed by New York City and Baltimore and Guilford County, North Carolina, also all showing really strong gains. And in 4th grade reading, Atlanta Public Schools was the only jurisdiction in the country, state or district.
Anywhere.
Yes.
Anywhere on anything, anywhere.
To make gains, statistically significant gains in 4th grade reading. So there are bright spots to look at, even though the overall picture is pretty sobering. But there are, I think, lessons we can draw from those jurisdictions.
And the one other one I would just point out is that the subset of Catholic schools who have traditionally scored higher, that continued to be a bright spot as well. And again, if we're going to, leaders are going to use these to look for these lighthouse districts, I think it's really important to pull that out. And I will say, and I think you hit on this, Hillary, I think the reason that there's convergence, as Leslie said, between how NAEP has set standards and the states is because back many years ago, before my hair was gray, actually before I even had children, and now I have one getting married this spring. So a long, long time ago in a land far, far away, but in Massachusetts, when we did our reforms in the early 90s that have been sustained, that eventually brought us in 2003 to being the top performing state in the country, it was because we looked to NAEP and we looked to the standards and we set a very high standard for what we expected from all students. And the one thing that I just think is so important to repeat over and over, and I'm sure our state chiefs will talk about this, is having those high expectations for every single student is just so critical in driving results. And then this is not a bright spot, it's an unbright spot, whatever the example. But the other thing that I think Leslie's staff and folks at the federal level have done a great job of demonstrating is just what a disaster high absenteeism is for student performance. And, you know, maybe it is intuitive to all of us that you can't learn if you're not there. But this is just a really critical factor that some of these results are being driven by in continued systemic high absenteeism rates. And we need everybody's best work to convince all parents of the importance of having their children in school. And then I would just add as an aside, and also reading to them at home. We all have a role to play. And my last little personal thing, so I'm
doing math. We can do math at home too.
Yes. My mother told me when my kids were little, she's like, you're doing okay with reading, but I don't think you're doing enough math work. So, and I do have a math.
Very wise.
I have a math graduate. I also will say making sure that we don't buy into gender stereotypes on math is another importance. That's just a personal statement. But a lot of times girls are discouraged in math. And I tried really hard not to do that. But my point was going to be instilling a love of lifelong reading in your children. It's what my parents did for me, especially my educator mom. And this weekend when we have hopefully snow cooperating a wedding shower for one of my twins, she had her sisters had one of their friends paint storybooks to decorate the shower because this child, and all of them, but is such an inveterate reader and just loves books so much. And so 23, almost 24 years old, that love of reading will sustain them over so long.
It's true. It's true. And our parents are our first teachers. I think Governor Swift couldn't agree more. And I was at the Tennessee Department of Ed when Tennessee was the fastest improving state in the nation on NAEP. And they have seen close to return to pre-pandemic levels in this year's assessment, which is exciting to see. And at the same time, the push for Tennessee state standards to align to NAEP all came from this idea of you have to tell parents the truth, right? Truth in advertising. What if you're not proficient on NAEP, then that there should be not such a huge gap between NAEP proficiency and state proficiency. You know, we've heard other state chiefs speak to that as well, and the importance that when we say a student is meeting expectations, that those expectations are rigorous and those expectations are setting them up for success. So thank you so much. I'm going to turn it back over to Anna Edwards so we can hear more about how our students, particularly in Alabama and Rhode Island, are being set up for success.
Yes, thank you, Hillary. Thank you, Jane. Thank you, Leslie, for walking us through the data. Angelica, I'll welcome you back at Reagan National Airport on your way back to Providence. And Eric Mackey in Alabama, thank you so much for joining us today. You all have had a couple weeks to look at these results. I know, Angelica, you got a sneak peek since you're on the board, and Eric's state leaders got to see the data first. Would love your initial reflection now that it's had time to sit in. Angelica, I know you were quoted in Ed Week talking about science of reading yesterday. So maybe we pick up there and have you kick it off with kind of your reflections on the data and how that relates to what you've seen in Rhode Island. And then we'll turn it over to you, Eric.
Sure. So, you know, after I've sat with the data for a little while now, it is really incumbent on all of us to kind of stay the course. I know that the scores are disappointing, but they really do tell the story. I think we do understand that prior to the pandemic, we saw that we were headed in the wrong direction. That's why many of us adopted the science of reading. in our states. We know that the states that have had success have been doing it for 10, 15 years. So we know that having a systematic system for reading, a research base, we'll see the results. We're starting to see them now. Like we held our own as the nation dropped in reading. So we're excited because we can see the correlation from our own assessment and the NAEP scores, because our standards are pretty high. We want to be honest with our parents. We want them to know where they are and what we need to do. So for us, having the science of reading at the helm and having high quality materials, really important for us. As we start looking at math, we went up in 4th grade math, and those were our younger kids. We adopted math curriculum pretty early on. So this stands to reason why we see some of those results in the 4th grade. But for us, it's really important that we don't get nervous and we don't want to backpedal and change. We have a tendency of doing that in education, but we have to stay the course. We've seen it from the states that have been doing it for longer, that they are surpassing their expectations, and we want to all do that. So we've made a commitment here in Rhode Island. We have the right to read bill. So everybody here, K-8 teachers, are all trained in the science of reading. And we see it changing. We see it matching. So I feel really hopeful for all of us, especially here in Rhode Island, that we're moving in the right direction. And I know that the next time we get our NAEP scores, it will look even better. But I want to warn everyone or caution us not to get very nervous, but it does make us think that we have work to do. We really do have work to do, and we have to be honest about where we are in this continuum.
Thank you. And Eric, would love for you to pick up there, in doing the work and thinking about the connection to policy. Alabama and the Numeracy Act, you were one of the first states to actually put math legislation in place when everyone's been focused on science of reading. So would love for you to talk about what you saw in the results and where you see opportunity and how, like I said, to continue to do the work.
Yeah, absolutely. So I certainly agree with Commissioner Infante Green. Look, we have got to stay focused. We've been using 3 big words here: strategy, focus, investment. We feel like we've adopted a lot of the right strategies, like Rhode Island has. We've invested heavily in the science of reading. We've invested heavily here in early numeracy and getting those right materials, getting a training for teachers. So the strategy's there. As she just said, we cannot lose focus though, because in education, it's typical that when we get bad results, and we've got mixed results across the country. Like we have mixed results here in Alabama. We saw some real bright spots. We saw some challenges, but we get mixed results. We typically retreat. We're like, oh, we have to start all over. We have to get all new materials, all new ideas. No, we've got the right strategy. We have to stay focused on that work, and we have to invest in it. So for example, when I talk about investment, we set aside about $200 million of our ESSER funds to do intensive summer school programs for early grades, reading and math every summer. And also after school, before school, we did some intercession work, and we saw that paid off. So even though, of course, the NAEP data don't come back by district for us, when we look at our state scores, we see that as students go, and the earlier we can get them into a summer program, the earlier we can get them into after school program where they've got high quality content, then we see those results doubling down. And as Governor Swift mentioned earlier, we have this real need in this country and an obligation, I'm going to say as educators, a moral obligation to make sure that the students whose families maybe can't do more for them, that we do that for them. And so that means we have to provide high quality after school programming, summer programming. And that's something we saw that worked. So we've gone back to our legislature and said, somewhere we have to continue these investments. We have to continue to do that. And we see that. And I think we see that the right strategies are there. As a country, we have to not lose focus, and we have to not lose faith and move forward. And the last thing I'd say about that is we through the science of reading, which all the states have adopted to some level, we know better now how to teach kids to read than we ever have before. But there's a big gap between learning to read and practicing reading. And I think we saw, even before the pandemic, a decline in students picking up a book and reading. And we've got to somehow create that culture again where students are not always, kind of deferring to watching a video. We need students during their downtime reading a book, not just watching video.
Yeah, it's a great point. Coming back to the point that Governor Swift made about high standards and expectations and the difference between state assessments and the NAEP, wondered if you all could maybe talk a little bit about any gaps you saw or consistency with the state assessment. You touched on this a bit, Angelica, but between your own state assessment and which I know you've continued to see gains on, and NAEP, and how those compare.
Well, it's always hopeful when you see that they actually do compare. So our state scores correlate to our NAEP scores, because then it's always hard to explain, right? And if that happens, it's really talking about what our standards are, where we're setting our assessments. In Rhode Island, what we saw was exactly in the NAEP scores, what we saw in our state assessments, which are the same assessments that Massachusetts takes. So it is really a high bar, and it really matches our standards. But one of the things that we have seen with our test results, because we started disaggregating it by attendance. So we saw in every single grade level that students that were actually in school, as opposed to those that are chronically absent, a 20 percentage point gap in every single grade level, from our third grade assessment all the way to SAT and PSAT. So one of the things that Governor Swift mentioned before that's really important that we've all been struggling with is the chronic absenteeism. We know that if kids come to school and we have the science of reading, we have math curriculum, we have standards that we're following, the kids will do better. But what we have in many of our states right now and many of our districts, and it's very different, is that sometimes there's 40% chronic absenteeism. Sometimes, and for all of those that are watching, chronic absenteeism is 10% of the school year. And in our state, it's 18 days. But that really isn't the number. It's usually 20, it's 30. So we're really seeing that gap. And when we look at our NAEP scores and we look at our scores, they match. But then we start disaggregating by the kids that are actually coming to school as opposed to the ones that are chronically absent. And we see the difference. And this year was the, NAEP asked the question of the students, like, yeah, have you been coming to school? And it was interesting to see how they responded. But that's also their perception, because what we found in our state was that parents and students didn't think that missing 2 days a month would make them chronically absent or would have an impact. And we all know that it does. So we are hopeful that we're trying to move the needle forward. But we really have to make sure that we have very structured programs for our students. And as you heard, Dr. Mackey, we also have programs that are after school. We used a lot of our ESSER dollars to add 30 minutes to the school day, which was an equivalent of 15 school days. And we ran summer camps. That extra time is crucial. It's crucial for our students. But what we do at that time is also important.
Love it. That was one of the questions that came in, was on summer school and after school and extra time. So thank you for covering that. And in Alabama, how do the results compare to your state assessments there?
Yeah, so we also see the same thing. Now we went, beginning in 2018-19, we knew we had some serious issues. So we adopted all new math standards and then all new reading standards right after that. And then, of course, you go through the whole process after you get new standards. For the first time, really first time in my career, we really looked at high quality instructional material and trying to make sure that districts were removing instructional materials that really weren't high quality. That's quite a fight, because you certainly get involved sometimes with textbook companies, and everybody has a book that they've, not everybody, but many teachers have a book they've been teaching out of for years, and no matter what the research says, they like that book. So we really had to work on getting high quality instructional materials in every classroom, getting teachers trained to use those materials. But then a big piece of that for us was adopting all new assessments. And for the first time, we aligned our assessments to NAEP. We build our new assessments and standards around the NAEP framework, and we set higher cut scores and more rigorous cut scores than we had ever set before. So it was good for us. It was hard when you explain to folks how, 20 years ago, you were showing that 85% of your kids are proficient, and now you're showing that 40% of your kids are proficient. Does that mean that the proficiency rates have dropped? No, it means we're telling parents a better story about how their children are actually doing. Because when you look at our NAEP scores then, there was a huge gap between what we were calling proficient and what NAEP saying was proficient. So we feel like that we have closed the honesty gap. I know all the states are working on how do you close that honesty gap. And well, they're not going to be perfect correlations with NAEP, but we've got to get closer to what the scores tell us, what parents want to see how their children are actually doing. And also we feel some good hope about the future when we look at our state assessments. So remember, these students whose scores we just got, they're in 5th grade now. They're more than halfway through their 5th grade experience. They were 4th graders when they took the NAEP, and they're the students who lost basically the last 2 months of their kindergarten experience, and then their 1st grade year was chaotic by any standard. So when we look at our younger students, 2nd and 3rd graders from this past year, we actually see even greater gains. So we feel pretty good that younger students who are coming back into a more regular kind of school setting are doing better. But there's the big but here. What the commissioner just said, we got to get them in school. So if they are not in school, they are still getting behind. And as Leslie mentioned earlier, that those high achievers seem to be gaining more ground than our low achievers. And we think that's a direct correlation also to attendance. So our high achievers are also more likely to be at school and more likely for their parents to do after school tutoring to get them into extra programming. Those lower performing students, unfortunately, are also more likely to have high absenteeism and to have less outside resources. So the gap is definitely growing. We've got to get those students at school.
Yeah, I just want to add to that if I can.
Please.
So we have real-time data on absenteeism, and one of the things that we saw this year versus last year was that if we get them back in, even though they were chronically absent, maybe for the last 2 years, we saw 10 percentage point gains. So they're recoverable, which is what we want to hear, because we're all in this place where we have these kids that are out for such a long period of time. But we have seen that with our data, again, that is very correlated to NAEP, that there is a way to actually put them back on track by using the high quality curriculum, but having them in the classroom, coming in every single day and having parents understand that. And this is the truth, right? This is the data. This is what's telling us the story and how we all have to work together.
Yeah, so important. We've gotten a couple of questions in the chat about high quality instructional materials, and both of you mentioned that as a key part and contributor to the success and the gains that you saw. The questions were related to 2 things: the definition of high quality instructional materials and how you've defined or set that at the state level to give guidance. And then the other question was about professional development and professional learning to actually make sure teachers know how to use high quality instructional materials. And so would love for both of you to touch on that, since you spoke about that in your opening comments.
Well, I'll start there. So high quality instructional materials, we've gone through a 2-step process now. So our previous process was the kind of old fashioned, what we call textbook review. Basically, we brought in a group of teachers, not saying they didn't do a good job, but these are experts in the field. But we asked them to do a basically minimum review of the book and tell us, does this textbook meet our state standards? And we weren't really looking at instructional strategy or vocabulary and those kind of things. Just give us a minimum. Does it meet the standard? And so you had a big list. Some of those materials were much better than others. And local districts usually don't have the expertise to really dig deeper and figure out which ones are best for them. And unfortunately, not always, but I would have to say many times schools would choose their book based on, the the vendor who came to them, and were they a very good presenter? Did they have a lot of extra things they could provide the teacher and those kind of things, but not looking at the quality of the material. So what we've done now, we have that process, but we've beefed it up. And then we've brought in a group of reading experts and a group of math experts to go a deeper level into actually looking at the material, looking at the teaching strategies, looking at how it aligns with in math, the mathematical practices, and in reading, looking at things like vocabulary and comprehension. And so our list got much more narrow. In fact, we only have 2 approved reading programs in the state, and I think we may have maybe 3 on math. So a much tighter group that districts can choose from. And then, hoping that, and I still think there's a lot of room for improvement, especially in mathematics, and hope that our textbook companies are going to continue to use the best research to really improve those materials.
So I'll add to that. We have a similar process, which is so interesting. Our districts cannot use anything that's not rated high quality or green on ed reports. That's number one. And we have a list of approved curriculum on our website, and that's what our districts can use. And what we do at the state level is that we facilitate professional development for that curriculum and implementation. And we're all in different places, right? Every district is in a different place. And the curriculum is only as good as it's implemented, which it becomes a big challenge for all of us because it takes money and time to be able to do that. And we are, every district's in a different place. One adopted earlier than the other. We had until 2025 to have 24 to have full adoption. And at the same time, we had training for the science of reading. But one of the things that was really important for us is that we surveyed the teachers. We've been doing the professional development to see actually where we are. We took a temperature, and unfortunately, we are not where we thought we would be. We still have teachers that were very honest. We're saying that they sort of use the curriculum sometimes. Some of them use it all the time. Some of them still go to teacher paid teacher. Nothing against teacher paid teacher. But we would like fidelity on curriculum that we know works, that is actually aligned to our standard, that doesn't simplify the information, because that's a challenge, is that we have to keep the rigor up. And that's what this curriculum is meant to do. If it's aligned to our standards, it is meant to keep the rigor up. And what we found in our own assessment, it was an anonymous survey that we put out statewide, is that we're in different places. It's uneven, and it's challenging, because that tells me that we're still in phase 2 of this.
Yeah, but teacher training is so important. And if you don't have the survey information, then you don't know where the teachers are. So very, very informative. On the topic of interventions and sustaining success over time, and thinking about how to make sure that we don't have a knee-jerk moment and change from the things that we know are working, are there systems that you all are thinking through, helping districts use data to inform instruction, to inform intervention, that you would recommend, or that you are seeing as a bright spot that's helping the schools and districts that are seeing in your success in your state to achieve those results?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's a lot of those things. So we're trying to get deep. Now, one of the things we've done, I mentioned we adopted new assessments fully aligned with NAEP. Well, we also, we worked with our testing vendor, to provide us with some formative assessments so that we could get this full continuum, so the teacher can get immediate feedback, we can get annual feedback, and then of course with NAEP, we only get limited feedback every other year in 2 grades for that small sample. But what we're seeing is all of those are well aligned. And of course, the teachers can best use those formative assessments they can use in the classroom. So we just need to make sure those good formative assessments that can feed instruction are aligned to our state assessments, aligned to the NAEP. And we feel pretty good about that. And the feedback from the field has been really good about that. So that's one tool we can give teachers. We're also trying to make sure that they take the new kind of training seriously. So the science of reading training, we're working on some better coaching for mathematics teachers. So under our Numeracy Act, we're going to employ eventually about 900 elementary school math coaches. We've got about 400 now. And so they're working hard to make sure that they help teachers understand the best ways to teach early math. And, that's the key. I think we all see that if students are really on track with mathematics by the 4th or 5th grade, they're probably going to do a lot better. Now, we saw some regression. Of course, the whole state saw some regression in middle school. But I think that part of that is we've just not really focused on middle school. Our focus, our intentional focus has been on the early grades. And I think that long-term, we're going to have to do something to think about middle school, but hopefully some of that will begin to correct itself if we really get the early grades right. It's about being intentional and staying on target, I think.
That answered some of the questions that we had gotten about 8th grade. So thank you for adding that too. Anything that you would add, Angelica?
Well, I think the other piece that I would welcome everyone to do this is to look at their NAEP scores and look at their own state assessment. Where are you? Like, if you're honest with yourself, where are you as a state or as a district, whoever is on? And then let's look at your interim assessments. Are they giving you the information that you need to actually impact classroom instruction? So data is really important for all of us to be able to pivot, to shift, where are we and what we need to do. And I think that that's really important. So I will say that we're seeing these things in 8th grade. Well, what do we do now, right? I think that when we started off with say, okay, now we have the scores, now what? And the now what, at least for me, is that we're going to assess all our students. We're working with new classrooms, and we're going to look at where the kids are, where are their skills in math, and we're going to make sure that we are giving them exactly what they need, not what we think they need, but really align it to our state standards and really double down on that. Like, this is not a moment to say, oh, okay, now they came out and move on. No, this is a moment for us to reflect and say, okay, what do we need to do? Like, what is it that this moment is telling us? And it is really about looking at our assessments and how we move forward.
With technology, you can do that so much more precisely as well. There's another question that I want to follow up with you on, Angelica, given your leadership in support of multi-language learners for your whole career. But it was a question about high quality instructional materials in efforts for students who need support the most, MLLs, special education, and just thought that would be a good segue to talk a little bit about those subgroups and anything that you would add on what you saw in the NAEP data, how you're thinking about making sure that those groups of students are also receiving the additional supports, and if anything you would add related to HQIM and supporting those students.
Yeah, this is going to be a little controversial, but I believe in the same curriculum for everyone. It is about really scaffolding and meeting the students and bringing them to where they are. I don't believe in a separate curriculum. It just doesn't make sense. And for our multilingual learners, we have materials in the home language. We know that if we give them resources in the home language, they're going to learn English faster. That is a fact. I'm not making that up. I think that it is, the research is there. So right now we have ability, all our curriculum comes in other languages. And if they don't, you need to push those curriculum companies to be able to do that. And we can do that as a mass, as a whole, and push for that. But many of the curriculum come in different languages. Give it to them. Even if you don't know the language, just give them the resource in the home language. Because if I don't know one word and that's the only block, just give it to them. I think it's really, really important. And for our differently able students, I'm blessed with an autistic son. And I have to tell you, he needs to have multiple interactions with something to be able to capture it. So give him the same curriculum, but have him approach it many different ways. I think that that's really, really important for us. We cannot lower the standards. We just have to figure out what do they need? What kind of accessibility do they need to actually engage with the curriculum?
So important. Anything that you would add to that as you look at the data and results in Alabama?
Yeah, so we were actually really proud of our subgroup data. I mean, our special needs students actually really did very well in 4th grade reading and math, in some cases actually outperforming our typical students. And I think part of that is that it's the interventions. So that tier 2, tier 3 instruction, but not taking them out of tier 1 instruction. So we can't just remove students from the classroom and teach them in a different way. I think the commissioner just said that. It's about offering high quality tier 1 instruction to everyone, but some students are going to need more built on top of that, and making sure that we perfectly identify what their special needs are, and then we address those needs. And for some students, that's going to be long term. It's going to be week after week, month after month. But for some students, it's not. Maybe there are learning gaps, and we're going to be able to do that tier 3 instruction for a short time and then move them back out. So we really want to identify. We work hard to identify the students who need extra help, whether they qualify for special education or not. Get them the tier 3 instruction, and then just make sure you don't use that 3rd tier instruction to try to replace 1st tier high quality instruction for every child.
Perfect. Well, I would love to invite, we have so many questions. We're not going to be able to get through them all, but we might try to do some rapid fire. Jane and Leslie, if you guys want to pop back on, there's some that might make sense to include the whole group in. But I'll kick it off first back to Alabama and Rhode Island with a question from Paula de Maria from NASB. Thank you for being here. And he asked, does either Alabama or Rhode Island look for districts and schools within their states that are bright spots and leverage them as exemplars to others? How are they creating momentum around improvement? So I'd love to hear how you do that and share best practices. Probably easier in Rhode Island than Alabama, but
Yeah, so I'll start off. When we get our state assessment, and now that we got our NAEP results, we start looking at who did well in what are they putting in place? So we align it with the curriculum that they're using, where they are within the continuum, how many years have they been using that, how many years have their teachers been trained in the science of reading. So it's really calibrating data so we know where we are. And it's also, where is there a need? Right. So can we share best practice? Can we have teachers come together? We just got $40 million for a reading grant from the federal government, which I hope will still be there. But that grant, it really helps us to target the places, and we want to work with we are currently working with the schools that have done a better job, because teachers learn from each other, right? We want to elevate the work that's happening from the school leader to the teacher and really make sure that they're learning from one another. So we're using that and putting coaches in the school. I can't tell you how valuable coaches are to keep moving. And as you start putting in curriculum, the professional development and in-class professional development is essential.
yeah.
Yeah, and we're doing some of the same things. We're really proud of the what came out, not exactly related to NAEP, but the Education Recovery Scorecard that I'm sure everybody on this call saw yesterday. So we've got 2 districts that are very different that were called out in there. So Birmingham is one of them. Birmingham's obviously an inner city school, high poverty, largest city in the state, but they've done some really creative things. We've started intercession programs. We're trying to, again, it's double the effort to make sure we get kids off the street and in school and in high quality programs. The other district called out was DeKalb County, which most people on this call have probably never heard of the northeastern part of the state. About 40% of their students are non-native English speakers, and they're showing remarkable growth. And it's very rural, very agricultural area of the state. But both of those districts they're having to do different kinds of things, but they're both investing very heavily in their students and in their teachers. And so we want to draw people in. In fact, tomorrow morning, we have a state school board meeting. We'll have about 50 schools in our board meeting. We'll have a full auditorium to recognize both reading gains and reading growth. And so we want to bring in our high performers, and we want to bring in our schools that have grown the most every year, and we do a big awards ceremony for them, and we're doing that tomorrow. And then we want people to go visit those places and see what they're doing.
Amazing. Amazing. Leslie, as you think about sharing best practices from NAEP's perspective, I love that you mentioned Atlanta Public Schools. That's my alma mater. I'm a proud APS graduate. But do you see NAEP TUTA districts collaborating and sharing what's working among districts of their size? Are there any things you'd highlight on how that's working?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question and a fantastic point. Those districts, I should say, volunteer to put themselves under this scrutiny every 2 years in fourth and eighth grade reading and math, and it's pretty remarkable. But they do it because they see the power in being able to look at their own results relative to districts that look more like them than maybe their other districts within their state.
Yeah.
And so there is a powerful network of chief academic officers and chief research officers, the data and accountability folks, the superintendents in those districts. And the Council for the Great City Schools is really does a remarkable job providing them with research and analytical support, convening. So yeah, I think that is the power of the TUDA network, and the TUDA assessment results is in the sharing of best practices, and why it's worth putting themselves up for public display in that way.
Yeah, absolutely. And as we get close to the end here, I'd love to end on the emphasis that we're seeing across the country. And I think at the federal level, at the state level, the local level, on connecting education to workforce. And I know that's something that both of our state chiefs talk a lot about. Jane, it's like your life right now, personally and professionally. Leslie, I'm sure that you're, as you think about NAEP, thinking about what the data means for the implications long-term of our country's economic competitiveness. But maybe we could just do a lightning round on how you're thinking about NAEP and improving ELA and math in the context of making sure that we have a workforce prepared for the future, or anything else you'd add on how you're connecting education to workforce in your states. And then Jane, maybe I'll kick it off with you. And then we can go to Rhode Island, Alabama, and Leslie, anything that you'd bring us home with from the NAEP perspective.
Yeah, so my non-NAGB, I would not be able to afford a wedding for my daughter from just my NAGB participation. My actual day job is working with college students to help them upskill in order to get good first jobs. And there's a enormous underemployment issue for college graduates in our country. And a lot of that are the deficits in skills that start at a very early age. And even though they're able to progress to a college education, they just don't have the critical skills and credentials in order to get a really good first job, which traditionally college has been the economic mobilization really engine of our country. I did not grow up with the amount of economic security that I have today, but going to college and the opportunities that opened for me provided that. And I think many of us are worried about AI. We're worried about what the future workforce will look like. Everything we're hearing from the employers that we work with is we need students with really good foundational skills. We need problem solvers. We need students who can communicate. We need students with resilience. And so, well, not necessarily written into the standards in NAEP, I think all of the things that we're hearing employers ask about are the things you get from a solid foundational education with very high levels of proficiency in math and reading.
Yeah.
I'd like to add to that. And I know that Governor Swift has been pushing this agenda. And in Rhode Island, I think one of the important things for us is that we have made it so that there's a CTE credential and your diploma, not one or the other, but both. Because we understand the value and how important that is to our students, the workforce, but they have to be ready. Like, we're not saying CTE, you have less of a requirement. You need those skills. Those skills are essential for our kids to succeed. So that's what we're doing. And we're pushing really hard on that. Because for us, especially because we're so small and we're sandwiched between Massachusetts and Connecticut, who are highly competitive, we have to be competitive. And we want to be able to make sure that our kids are able, whether they're going to go to college or not, that they have a viable career, some sort of career that they can look forward to. And that means that they have to have very strong reading and math skills. We know that math is a predictor for success and financial outcomes in the future. So we're really making sure that that is our anchor, because we're the Ocean State. That's our anchor, and we'll keep moving forward. But CTE is the way for us. It's not one or the other, it's both.
Yeah. Well, amen to what both of these smart ladies have already said. Yeah, we're the same thing. I think all the states are moving forward with this this newfound idea that should not have been newfound, that there are multiple ways to be successful in life. So some students, it's going to be a four-year college. For some, it's going to be a path through a two-year college. For some, it's going to be straight out of high school, but then they're going to be going back through various training programs, credentialing programs, or two-year or four-year college later. So we have to set all of our students up for success. And that means they have to be good readers and they have to be good thinkers. I tell people all the time, math is not about solving math problems. Math is just about solving problems, period. It is, at its core, a critical thinking, problem-solving discipline. And we have to help all students understand that.
Leslie, anything you'd add?
Oh boy, hard to follow those. I would just say that there's a lot of research that shows that there are economic impacts for states and for the country, and individual outcomes or individual impacts for students that are associated with test scores. And on NAEP specifically, Eric Hanushek from Stanford has done a lot of research on this and has shown that when states decline on 8th grade math, it is predicted to lead to lower GDP and lower lifetime earnings for students. And so there's a real connection between the achievement on these assessments and outcomes for our society and for our children as individuals.
Well, I think that's a perfect way to end it, and to see and hear from these amazing leaders today that are seeing the results that they are and sharing how they're getting there. So thank you so much to everyone who's joined, and we'll look forward to following up. We'll be sending out the recording and the slides through our Whiteboard Notes newsletter, which you can sign up for at whiteboardadvisors.com. So thank you again so much for your time. Hillary, thanks for putting this together.
Thank you all. Have a great rest of the day.
Thank you.